My sister was the golden child who bullied me for years, so I exposed everything to her husband using old journal pages and destroyed her perfect image. My sister Helen has always been the golden child in our family, and my parents never tried to hide it. Being the youngest, she was considered their miracle baby. My parents had spent years trying for another child after me. Despite major health risks following my birth, doctors advised my mom not to get pregnant again. They told my parents to give up hope of growing their family. But 5 years later, my mom beat the odds and got pregnant again. That moment felt like a miracle to my dad, who was over the moon about having another child. From that point on, Helen's miracle label shaped everything about her childhood and how she was treated. My parents always gave her the best of everything, treating her like royalty. Every one of her milestones and achievements was met, with celebration and applause, constantly reinforcing her special place in the family. Their favoritism wasn't hidden, it was loud and obvious. Everyone knew it, especially me. Helen clearly held a higher, more treasured spot in their hearts. Now, don't get me wrong. My parents did take care of me. I had everything I needed. But the way they treated me always felt like an afterthought. Take school events. For example, Liv, Helen, and I both had something going on the same day. They would always go to hers. They'd say, "She's the youngest. She needs us more." Like my accomplishments and needs mattered less. There are stacks of photo albums filled with pictures of Helen, organized, labeled, cherished. My parents still look through them with pride. But me, they don't even have one album. They claim my baby pictures were lost in a storm. I just wish they'd saved a few. I would have liked to see what I looked like growing up. It's tough not to feel like an afterthought when your own childhood memories don't exist the way your siblings do. As we grew up, Helen's problems were always dealt with right away, no matter how small. If I ever needed anything or voiced a concern, my dad would call me spoiled. If I was nervous to try something new or talk to people, my mom would scold me for being dramatic and tell me to be confident like Helen. My parents made it crystal clear. My feelings were secondary to hers. Then came the blame. If Helen messed up, I was somehow responsible. They'd say, "You're the older one, you should have taught her better." It didn't matter that I had nothing to do with it. Because I was born first, I was always the one at fault. That unfairness made my position in the family even more painful. Always second best, always blamed, always in Helen's shadow. Helen didn't make things any easier. She knew she was the favorite and used it to her advantage every chance she got. She'd manipulate situations to get what she wanted, especially when we argued. She would take my stuff without asking, clothes, makeup, anything she wanted. If I dared to speak up, she'd run to our parents crying, accusing me of being selfish. And without fail, I'd get scolded and guilted into giving in. It was always the same story. I was the bad one, the one who needed to be more generous. But Helen never shared anything. She was super protective of her belongings and her space. For years, we shared a room, and she guarded her side like a hawk. Even after we got our own rooms, she kept that same energy. Her stuff was off limits, but mine was fair game. That double standard wore me down. It chipped away at my self-worth. Helen had a way of twisting everything in her favor. And with my parents always backing her up, I felt like I was alone. No matter what I did, I was always the one who messed up. And no matter what she did, she was always the one they defended. Because of my sister and my parents' actions, I fell into a deep depression. My self-esteem slowly crumbled, and I developed serious self-image issues during my teenage years. The anxiety was relentless, especially when Helen would pick fights or mock me. I lived in constant fear of confrontation, always walking on eggshells. My parents' loud, aggressive yelling often pushed me to the edge of panic attacks. When they got too close during one of their tirades, I'd feel like I couldn't breathe, like I was suffocating beneath the weight of their anger and disappointment. No one in my family ever seemed to notice or care about what I was going through. I felt trapped, like a caged animal stuck in a cycle of emotional and psychological abuse. Completely alone, with no one to turn to. The only comfort I had was my journal. Every night, I would write down my thoughts, my fears, my frustrations, and my sadness. It was the only place where I could be fully honest about what I was experiencing. Putting my feelings on paper helped me process the chaos and find a sliver of peace. I always kept the journal hidden under my bed, terrified Helen would find it and mock me for being too emotional. One day, my worst fear came true. Helen, who constantly snooped through my things, even after I'd begged her to stop, found my journal while I was out. She must have read it, violating the one place where I could truly be myself. That evening when I got home, saw my parents and Helen sitting silently in the living room, their faces unusually serious. For a moment, I panicked, thinking maybe someone in the family had died. I asked if everything was okay. My dad motioned for me to sit down and said they needed to talk. My chest tightened as I obeyed, dread spreading through me like wildfire. That's when my mom pulled out my journal from behind her back. My eyes widened in disbelief. I demanded to know what she was doing with it. Helen just smirked, clearly enjoying the chaos she had created. My mother looked at me with a cold, unfamiliar seriousness and asked if what I had written reflected my true feelings. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. That journal had been my safe space, the only place where I could process everything they put me through. Now, all my most private thoughts had been exposed to the very people who caused them. I could feel a panic attack building in my chest. Still, I tried to stay calm. I answered quietly that yes, everything in the journal was real, and they had no right to read it. My dad shook his head and said that if what I wrote was true, then they had serious concerns about me. I stared at him, confused. He went on to say that, based on my journal, he thought I was a psychopath who needed help because of the hatred I supposedly felt toward them. I was stunned. Nowhere in my journal had I expressed hatred, only hurt. I had written about the pain their actions caused me, the neglect, the constant comparisons. And yet, they were twisting my pain into something dark and dangerous. My parents began accusing me of being disturbed for writing such dark things and called me a psychopath for even keeping a journal. My mom claimed she and my dad never treated me the way I had described. She said I was making it all up in my head, writing fiction to fill the pages. She insisted I needed help before I hurt someone. Helen chimed in too, saying she was embarrassed to be related to someone like me and that my behavior was clearly not normal. I tried to defend myself, explaining that I had never written anything bad about them, that the journal was just me trying to make sense of my life. But they didn't care. They were stuck on the idea that something was wrong with me. Nothing I said mattered. They had already decided I was the problem. I felt exposed, humiliated, and completely alone. They had taken the one shred of privacy I had left and weaponized it against me. Then, to make things worse, my parents said they were taking me to see a psychiatrist the next day, not out of concern, but because they believed I needed serious help before things went south. Their words were dripping with judgment and false concern, making it clear that they saw me not as a person in pain, but as a problem to be fixed. I felt utterly betrayed and powerless, as if they were rewriting the truth just to protect their version of events. That sense of helplessness followed me for months. But when I finally crossed state lines and started over somewhere new, I felt a kind of freedom I'd never known before. Still, getting there was far from easy. My family's refusal to acknowledge the damage they had caused cut deeper than anything. Instead of admitting the truth, they turned the blame on me. It only reinforced the alienation and loneliness I had always felt. When I first started therapy, I felt so uncomfortable and guilty, like I'd actually done something wrong. I had internalized the idea that I was the issue in our family, and I was ashamed to speak about it. But my psychiatrist recognized that hesitation and used my journal as a way to connect with me. She would read entries and gently ask questions about what I'd written. That approach made it easier for me to open up. I'd always been better at expressing myself on paper, so using the journal in our sessions helped me process everything. As the weeks passed, I began to trust her. Slowly, I shared more about how I'd been treated my whole life, how the favoritism, the constant blame, and the emotional neglect had made me feel invisible and broken. For the first time, someone truly listened. She validated my pain and helped me see that my feelings weren't just valid. They were the result of very real and unfair treatment. It was a painful process, but it opened my eyes to the truth. I wasn't the problem my family painted me to be. Eventually, my psychiatrist called my parents in for a session. She told them, point blank, that their behavior had been damaging. At first, they were defensive. They argued that they had provided for me, that I should be thankful instead of blaming them. But my psychiatrist didn't let them off the hook. She reminded them that having children is a choice and providing basic needs doesn't erase the responsibility to nurture and love equally. She calmly but firmly detailed all the moments I had shared with Hertha favoritism. The blame, the way they dismissed my feelings, explained how those things led to my anxiety and depression. For once, my parents had to hear it from someone else. The silence and shame on their faces said it all. They had never been held accountable before, and now they were being forced to face the reality of what they'd done. I thought maybe things would finally change. But on the way home, my dad told me they were pulling me out of therapy. He claimed the psychiatrist was biased and sided with me unfairly. My mom backed him up, saying that since I blamed them for everything, there was no point in wasting money on someone who only made things worse. I felt crushed. After everything we'd discussed, they still refused to take responsibility. It was like the session had never happened. I was just a teenager, powerless to defy them or continue therapy. On my own, even though I couldn't go back, the sessions I did have helped me more than they knew. I'd gained tools to manage my emotions and, most importantly, a better understanding of my reality. I realized that if I wanted things to change, I would have to be the one to make it happen. That meant shifting my focus entirely to school. I poured myself into my studies, more determined than ever to improve my grades. I saw college as my only escape, my one shot at freedom. Home. I started emotionally disconnecting. Whenever I was around my family, I shut myself off to protect my peace. I refused to let their opinions or behavior hurt me any longer. I stopped journaling, knowing how dangerous it was for them to have access to my private thoughts. Instead, I set clear mental boundaries and gave everything I had to my academic goals. And it worked. When I got accepted to a great university on a full scholarship, one that happened to be out of state, my parents didn't take it well. They were completely against it. But this time, I didn't care. It was my life. And for the first time, I was finally taking control. So when I decided to host her birthday, it wasn't just about cake and decorations. It was about showing up. On my terms, her tone was unusually sweet, almost forced, and it immediately made me suspicious. I politely declined, telling her that I wasn't feeling up to it and preferred to stay home and rest. She pressed, saying it would mean a lot to her if I came, that she wanted to make amends and reconnect. Despite her attempts to sound sincere, I didn't buy it. There was too much history, too many past wounds that hadn't healed. I told her I'd think about it, just to get her off the phone, but deep down, I already knew my answer. Moving out and cutting ties with my family had been the turning point of my life. When I left for college, far away and with all my documents in hand, I wasn't just escaping, I was reclaiming my freedom. At the time, my parents didn't realize it would be the last time they'd see me for years. Even when they tried to call or visit, I stayed distant. I never came home for holidays. Whenever they tried to guilt-trip me, I shut down immediately. I wouldn't let them manipulate me again. I cut off my sister entirely, treating her as if she didn't exist. With that newfound independence, I poured everything into my future. After graduating, I landed an incredible job and never looked back. For years, I mirrored the emotional detachment my parents had once shown me. But everything shifted when I got engaged to the love of my life. Word of my wedding reached my parents through extended family, and they finally reached out. They were shocked that I hadn't invited them. When they called, their tone was different, hesitant, humbled. For the first time, they apologized. They admitted their past mistakes, expressing regret and asking to be part of this new chapter in my life. They couldn't change what had happened, they said, but they hoped to build new memories especially now that they were starting a family. Their apology stirred up a storm of emotions. But after some reflection, I chose to let go of my grudge. I invited them to the wedding. They asked if Helen could come too, but I stood firm in my refusal. To their credit, they didn't argue. At the wedding, my parents were genuinely happy for me. They smiled, laughed, and celebrated with us. Looking back, I don't regret including them. It felt like the right thing to do. Since then, I've made the effort to visit them occasionally, mostly for dinner or simple catch-ups. During these visits, I can't always avoid Helen. She still tries to get under my skin, throwing subtle jabs about my marriage or family. But I don't let her get away with it. I call her out, making sure she knows her behavior won't be tolerated. Her bitterness only seems to have grown, especially after finding out that I have a great relationship with my in-laws, unlike her own. Apparently, her husband's family never fully accepted her, and that rejection still stings. Now, she uses passive-aggressive comments about my life as a way to vent her own dissatisfaction. My father has noticed her behavior and has even told her to stop on multiple occasions. She never listens. She keeps throwing her little barbs, hoping I'll break, but I don't. 4 months ago, I found out I was pregnant. My husband and I were absolutely thrilled. Since he earns double what I do, we decided together that I would step away from work for a while to focus on my health and the baby. His support and that of my in-laws has been amazing. They've helped me in every way imaginable, ensuring I feel loved and cared for. Helen, of course, didn't take the news well. When she learned I'd left my job to focus on the pregnancy, she was livid. Her anger came from her own experience. Her husband never let her stay home during her pregnancies because they relied on both incomes. She never got the chance to rest or take a break. So now, she lashes out at me. She criticizes my decision constantly, calling it foolish and humiliating. I usually just laugh it off and remind her that I have the flexibility to return to work whenever I choose, thanks to my professional background. But Helen always finds a way to twist the story. She's insisted that my husband must be controlling, and that I've let go of my independence. The irony, of course, is that this was entirely my decision. Her judgment is less about me and more a reflection of her own unhappiness. That's why I avoid her whenever I can. I've fought too hard for my peace to let her drag me back into drama. Just a week ago, she called inviting me to her birthday dinner party. I knew what that meant. I'd have to face them again. I never thought I'd need those snapshots, but now they felt like the perfect reminder of everything Helen had done. All the hurt, the manipulation, the cruelty was all there in those pages. I read through them, tears burning in my eyes, not just because of the past, but because I had allowed myself to believe, even for a moment, that things with Helen might ever change. That maybe, just maybe, she had grown. Clearly, she hadn't. When Helen invited me to her birthday dinner, she made it seem like a casual family gathering. She said our entire family and her in-laws would be there and wanted both me and my husband to attend. Given how little I'd been out since getting pregnant, I actually welcomed the idea. I thought being around so many people would keep her from zeroing in on me, so I agreed to go. But of course, things didn't go as planned. My husband ended up swamped with a last-minute assignment at work. He was already stressed and kept apologizing for not being able to leave on time. I told him it was okay, understood. These things happen. When he finally picked me up, we were pretty late, but I still didn't want to cancel. I figured it was better to show up late than not at all. When we arrived, I quickly realized we had missed the bulk of the event. Most of the guests had already eaten and were mingling. Even my parents had left, as my dad doesn't like driving at night. My sister immediately called us out for being late. I didn't blame her for being frustrated, and I stepped in to apologize for my husband, who was clearly uncomfortable. She led him to a seat and fixed him a plate of food, which was a relief. But then she pulled me aside into the kitchen. That's when she told me there was no food left for me. Everyone had already had second or even third helpings. I was stunned. I hadn't eaten, and being pregnant made that even harder to cope with. Still, I didn't want to start an argument. I calmly suggested ordering something online for myself to avoid more trouble. She agreed to order food, which I appreciated. But then she added that since I had come late and hadn't helped at all during the evening, the least I could do now was help clean the dishes. I was shocked. I let out a dry laugh and told her I hadn't expected to be asked to work just because. I was invited to a dinner, especially not while pregnant and UNFED. Her reaction was instant and furious. In a sharp, quiet voice, she snapped that I was her sister and should be helping, especially since she had cooked everything herself. She even mentioned that our mother had helped serve guests, so I should pitch in too. She said her husband never helped in the kitchen, so she needed me. I reminded her that if she felt so overwhelmed, she probably shouldn't have invited such a large group of people. That hit a nerve. She hissed that I'd never understand her situation and that I should just shut my mouth and help. Then she hit me with a cruel jab, she said, now that I was pregnant. I was basically just a pathetic waitress for my husband anyway. So helping her with the dishes shouldn't be a big deal. Her words were so vicious, they stunned me. Already hungry, tired, and emotionally raw, I felt the tears well up. But I refused to let her see me break. I turned and walked straight into one of her guest bedrooms, shutting the door behind me. I needed a moment to breathe, to pull myself together. My old panic response began to creep in: tight chest, shaky breath, blurry vision. I hoped no one noticed, especially not my husband. I just needed space. As I sat alone, trying to calm my nerves, a wave of anger swept through me. I had tried to give Helen chance after chance, but she hadn't changed. She was the same manipulative, cruel person she'd always been. I realized in that moment that she needed to be reminded of everything she had put me through. She needed to understand that I wasn't the same scared, silenced girl I used to be. That's when I remembered the photos. Images of the old journal entries I had taken with my phone before leaving home years ago. I'd backed them up in my email, just in case. I never thought I'd use them, but now it felt like the right time. And before I go any further, you should know I didn't take any of these steps lightly. It wasn't out of pettiness or revenge. It was about finally standing up for myself after a lifetime of complaint, being mistreated, gaslighted, and silenced. That night, after Helen's cruel behavior pushed me to my breaking point, I went back through all the photos I'd saved of my old journal entries pages filled with years of pain, betrayal, and emotional abuse. Those pages held every memory Helen tried to erase and every humiliation I had buried. And I made a decision. Before my husband and I left her house, I sent those photos to her husband. Bill, the one person I knew Helen was genuinely afraid of. My parents would never hold her accountable. But Bill, he might finally make her face the consequences. I wrote him a long, heartfelt message. I explained how Helen had bullied me for years, manipulated situations, and constantly made me feel worthless. I told him about the dinner party, how she invited me only to demean me and make me clean up after everyone, all while I was hungry and pregnant. I pointed out how her resentment towards me seemed to come from jealousy because I had what she didn't: a supportive, loving partner. I wanted him to understand the truth about her and how her behavior wasn't just a one-off. This was a pattern deeply rooted in our family history. As you might expect, it didn't go over quietly. Bill was furious. He confronted Helen, and they had a major blow-up. He couldn't believe how long she had been bullying me and how she had spun false narratives to their family for years. He even told my parents that he now saw Helen in a completely different light. Of course, my mother blamed me entirely, claiming I had gone too far by exposing Helen. My dad, surprisingly, stayed neutral, maybe for the first time ever. For those asking, yes, my husband was just as angry as I was. When I told him everything Helen said to me at the dinner, he was livid. He called her directly and made it very clear she was out of line. He told her to stop making snide remarks about our family and reminded her she didn't know half the story. I've never seen him so protective before, and I'm sure Helen didn't expect that kind of reaction. She hasn't said a word to me since. A lot of you have asked why Bill's response was so intense. The truth is, his own family has always seen Helen as selfish and inconsiderate. For years, they've voiced their disapproval of her, but Bill blinded. By love kept defending her. He gave her the benefit of the doubt, thinking she just had a difficult personality. But when he read the journal entries, it was eye-opening. He realized how little he actually knew about her past, especially about the way she treated me. Helen never told him the truth. She kept our entire history hidden from him, which is why he always assumed we were just not close. But after hearing my story and reading my words, the dots connected for him. He told me on a recent phone call that it all made sense now, how his own family's discomfort, his own subtle doubts, and her tendency to blame everyone else were signs he had ignored. He even admitted he's now concerned about how she might be treating their child when he's not around. Let me clear up a few final things. Yes, Helen blamed me entirely for everything and sent me a storm of hateful messages after the party. That is, until my husband shut her down once and for all. Since then, she's gone completely silent. My mom, on the other hand, keeps pressuring me to apologize to fix things by telling Bill I exaggerated the trauma from my childhood. I refused. I told her plainly that if she continues to enable Helen and defend her lies, my husband and I will have no choice but to cut contact with her too. My dad understands. He hasn't said much, but he hasn't condemned me either, which honestly says a lot coming from him. At the end of the day, I'm not sorry for defending myself. Not anymore. I don't know what decision Bill will ultimately make about his relationship with Helen. That choice belongs to him alone. All I ever wanted was to expose the truth, to make my sister understand that she couldn't continue tearing me down without consequence. I wanted her to realize that her words and actions had real impact, and that I wouldn't stay silent anymore. I don't regret what I did, not one bit. For the first time, I stood up for myself in a way that couldn't be ignored or twisted. And now, the rest is up to Bill. It's his future, his marriage, and his call to make.